Hi everyone, happy Tuesday, or happy whenever you happen to be catching up on this episode if you're not joining us live. Welcome to episode 4 of series 6 of Probably Nothing, brought to you by the Eve Appeal. But you obviously know it's the Eve Appeal because you're watching through our channels. My name is Karen. I work for the Eve Appeal. Kel Surprise. I run our Ask Eve information service with our wonderful nurses, and we started Probably Nothing in June 2020 because we wanted to create a platform where we have weekly live chats with an expert on a particular gynae health topic, where we can bust the myths, share personal experiences, share information, and get your questions on that particular topic answered by a professional. We called it Probably Nothing because lots of people who come to us at the Ask Eve service, which is a free expert information service, and people can call or email with any type of gynae cancer query. Lots of people that contact us at Ask Eve are almost apologetic for bothering us, say, oh, it's probably nothing but, and then go on to ask their gynae question or share their gynae health concern. And yes, luckily a lot of the time the probably nothing is right, because, for example, all of the symptoms for all of the gynae cancers are more likely to be something less serious than cancer. But 58 people every day in the UK are diagnosed with a gynae cancer. So for 58 people a day, that probably nothing is unfortunately something. So that's the sort of thinking behind starting this series. This series 6, I don't know how we've come up with 6 so far, but we're still going, and I love it. It's one of my favourite parts of my job. So this series has been focused on inherited risks with regards to gynae cancers, and it's important to stress that you don't inherit cancer from your mother or father, but you can inherit a genetic condition that means you're at an increased lifetime risk compared to someone else that doesn't have the alteration of developing certain gynae cancers. When sort of speaking about familial links, hereditary conditions, out of the 5 gynae cancers, so in order of prevalence, womb, ovarian, cervical, vulval, and vaginal. Womb and ovarian are the 2 of the diseases that have hereditary links, have genetic conditions that can put someone at an increased risk of womb or ovarian cancer. In the first half of this series, episodes 1 and 2, we spoke about the BRCA gene alteration, which with regards to gynae significantly increases somebody's risk of ovarian cancer. And last week I spoke to wonderful Tracy about the professional side of Lynch syndrome, which puts someone at an increased risk of womb cancer, and to a much lesser extent, but nothing, ovarian cancer. And it's really important for us to kind of balance the professional with the personal. So we wanted to end this series by speaking to somebody who has Lynch syndrome, who is living with a diagnosis of Lynch syndrome and has also experienced womb cancer as well. And so I'd like to bring on my lovely guest, Helen, and the screen should now split into 2. There she is. Hello, Helen.
Hi, Karen. Thank you for inviting me on as your guest.
Thank you for being here. And we had a little tease backstage, didn't we, about how long my intro would be, and that was only 4 minutes, which I would like to say, Helen, is quite good for me. So I hope you're not complaining.
That's fine.
Thank you so much. Helen, so you are here because you have Lynch syndrome, and in last week's episode with Tracy, we were speaking about how someone will find out they have Lynch syndrome in one of 2 ways. They will either go to their GP with a family history but not a cancer diagnosis and find out that way, or they will find out as part of a Lynch syndrome relevant cancer diagnosis. And that's the camp you're in, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
So can you just we'll go through lots to do with your story or your diagnosis of both the syndrome and cancer, but can you just start by just explaining like what happened with regards to your cancer diagnosis, how that came about, the womb cancer side of your story, please?
Yeah, no, sure. So I was approaching menopause. Periods were all over the place, very chaotic. but things started to change a little bit. They sort of carried on for ages, and the discharge became some more pink or yellow. And I thought I probably ought to get checked out at the GP. So I saw my lovely GP. She said it's probably nothing. I think I said that as well.
Yeah, everyone says it. It's such a common phrase. Everyone says probably nothing. Yeah.
Well, because it's quite a reassuring thing to hear, isn't it?
You know, when you just to quickly interrupt you, so I'm getting like the full picture. So when you say coming up to menopause, we know like the average age is sort of 51 in the UK. Were you 51? Were you 47? Because it can take a while. The perimenopause stage can be a long old slog, can't it?
A bit later than that for me, actually. So it was about the time my 53rd birthday when I went to the GP. So yeah, it was heading that way, but I wasn't in menopause.
To get kind of really specific, and of course you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but what about the kind of change to your periods, the bleeding, what about it made you think, I don't think this is menopause?
It was because it went on for a lot longer, so almost one period went into another. I mean, it probably wasn't a proper period, and as it discharged, so it wasn't frank red blood. It was more pinky and watery or yellowy. It was odd. I didn't think it was anything, but I thought, well, let's get it checked out.
Of course. So you went to your GP and said, "This is what's happening. This is my pattern of what's gone on." And even though you both said probably nothing, what happened after that? Did you have to sort of go away and then say, "No, I think it is something"? Or
no? I mean, she was great actually. I think she had to fudge the form actually to get me an ultrasound scan. She said, "I just want to be sure." So sent me off for that, which was a good thing actually, because that found a polyp, so a little sort of stalky growth growing into the womb from the lining, not very big, a couple of centimeters or something. So she told me the result of that and said, again, it's probably nothing. But we should send you off to see a gynecologist, and they'll have a look at you. And they did a hysteroscopy where they put the camera up through the cervix and have a little guddle around inside your womb. And they took that polyp away. And again,
which at this point, we still don't think, oh, it's cancer. It's kind of polyps aren't uncommon. It's sort of...
No. The gynecologist walked out the door and said, probably get you back in 3 or 4 months' time and we'll talk about HRT. And that was that. And then, of course, you get the phone call the following week to say, we'd like to see you on Friday afternoon for an appointment. So,
Helen!
Immediately the alarm bells go off. You know straight away that it's... And again, you just try and dismiss it and think, well, maybe it's precancerous or something.
Had you, when you were just having the odd sort of pink watery discharge and the doctor was referring you for the scan and, you know, it was the polyp, and up until that point, had you thought like, oh, God, it could be cancer? Or were you just being thorough? Or were you sort of going to the GP saying, hello, I think I've got womb cancer?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm realistic. I mean, I knew there was a tiny chance it could be cancer, but I don't think I thought it was. So this was a massive shock. You know, to go in, you know, on a Friday afternoon. I took my husband. They didn't ask me to, but you know, I put 2 and 2 together, and it wasn't the greatest of experiences, because actually the biopsy, the pathology made it look quite bad. It turned out that was quite a high grade tumor, so quite aggressive looking cells doing all sorts of weird things under the microscope. So yeah, those next few days were quite scary, really. I mean, I thought that was it. But things got progressively better after that. CT scan was clear. I obviously went to have surgery about a month later, so I had everything taken out: womb, ovaries, fallopian tubes, cervix, shed loads of lymph nodes. And the great news from that is it hadn't spread very far at all. So it was mostly in that polyp, which was sort of outside of my body. So that was really good news. So I didn't need any chemotherapy or radiotherapy.
So it was sort of, it was contained, but what was there was a little bit nasty in terms it was a high grade. So if people who are listening don't know, but I'm sure lots of you do because you're into this sort of thing, that's why you're watching Probably Nothing. But with cancer, we stage it in terms of stages and grades, and stages in terms of like how far it's spread. So a stage 1 is contained to the area, i.e. the womb in Helen's case. And then obviously stage 2, 3 and 4 means it's spread. And then in gradings, it's 1, 2 and 3. So it's kind of how badly the cells within that tumour are behaving. So yours, whilst it was nasty and it was a grade 3, it was at least contained, thank God.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant.
So all that meant was they just kept an eye on me for sort of, well, it was 3+ years after that with COVID, but touch wood, here I am 5 years later, all good.
Touch wood, looking amazing in a sort of similar colour palette, like you match my cushions. What more could I ask for, Helen? So when, I don't know what you thought when you were diagnosed, but not to make it about me, but when, I know it's not about cervical at all, but I just have to mention myself in every episode somehow. But I didn't even sort of think about I mean, not that cervical is related to genetic conditions, but I didn't even sort of consider thinking, oh, is this anything to do with family history or anything like that? When you were diagnosed, did you sort of think, did any sort of alarm bells in your head go off in terms of other people in your family's diagnosis or anything? Or was it kind of just, I'm Helen, I've got womb cancer, that's me, that's that?
Yeah, no alarm bells at that stage. I think my dad had prostate cancer at that time, and there was a bit of prostate cancer and bowel cancer in the family, but in older men in their 70s, 80s, so not anything particularly out of the ordinary. The only thing, there was a Macmillan pamphlet that I picked up, which had, I think it mentioned Lynch syndrome, but it talked about it being in women with womb cancer diagnosed before they were 50. So no, I was only 53. I sort of discounted that. I sort of read about it and thought, no, that doesn't apply to me.
Doesn't apply to me. So you had your op, so you had the total hysterectomy, everything out. That was that. Lymph nodes were negative. So if someone's lymph nodes are positive, it means like the cancer sort of started to travel. So they would need chemo or radio, depending on the disease and what combination, etc., to try and sort that out. But it was negative for you, Helen, which means the surgery, as far as they knew at the time and have continued to check, did the job, which is great. So how come I've got you on a Lynch syndrome program then? Like, just justify yourself to me. So you knew, what are you doing here? Yeah. Because you said you didn't really think like too much about family links and the pamphlet, oh, it's not me. So what happened?
No. Well, fast forward a year, and I'm feeling pretty good about life. I'm alive, and I want to. Sounds a bit cheesy, but I want to give something back, and I want to celebrate this. So I didn't know anything about any gynae charities at all, but I discovered Eve Appeal. I discovered they were doing a trek, the Go Red trek in the September of that year. Yeah. So the family and I all signed up to do that. And yeah, that was brilliant. We had a great 25k walk around Derbyshire.
You're one of those, I mean, you're lovely, but you're annoying, Helen, because you make people like me look bad. Because every year, I had cancer years ago, and every year Athena, our lovely CEO, is like, come on the trek. And I say, I don't want to. Just because I had cancer, it doesn't mean I'm going to do a walk for cancer. And then I get wonderful people like yourselves who just say, oh, I just wanted to give back and did a trek. And I think, oh no, I've got to slap my own wrists.
You'll have to go on the next one, Karen.
Oh, don't you start. Don't you start, woman. No. Carry on with your story. Don't try and turn this into a recruitment.
As it happened at the time, because I'd discovered Eve Appeal, you were running a campaign at the time, the Let's Talk Lynch campaign, yes. Which this was all about increasing awareness of Lynch syndrome in people with womb cancer and about pushing through to get women tested, because at that time they weren't routinely being tested. And you were working with Professor Emma Crosby and Dr. Neil Ryan.
We have to do a quick pause to just sing their praises, don't we? They are two of the best people I've ever met in terms of research and gynae, and Emma leads the research, doesn't she, at Manchester in regards to Lynch awareness, Lynch research, and her and Neil and the team got it over the line with NICE, National Institute of Clinical Excellence, to get because basically, like, if people don't know already, so the main cancers, as I said at the beginning, that Lynch affects is bowel and womb. So anybody with any anatomy can get bowel cancer as long as you've got a bowel, but obviously only about 50% of the population, women, people with wombs, can get womb cancer. So for a while, people upon a bowel cancer diagnosis were being offered Lynch syndrome testing as part of their diagnosis, because obviously it can inform their treatment, and their family cascade testing, and can help people, saves lives. But the same wasn't being done for womb, was it, Helen? So people were, and also typically, again, there's no sort of right or wrong, but a typical picture for a Lynch syndrome patient is that they would have an early-ish womb cancer, survive it, and then go on to have a bowel cancer later in life, and be a lot more poorly, and be less likely to survive that second Lynch-related cancer. So Emma's whole thing and Neil's whole thing is, why wouldn't we test all womb cancer patients? Because it will help their sons, it will help their own bowel screening later. It's crazy that wasn't just, we'll test Lynch, because the prevalence is about the same. It's about 3 or 4% in both diseases. So isn't it crazy that wasn't until they sorted that out for us? They're incredible.
Yeah, a massive sea change, and there's still some work to do on that, but it's certainly improving. But I'd genned up about Lynch. I'd watched all their videos on your website, and I went to this trek thinking I need to talk to somebody about it. So I spoke to Tracy, the lovely Tracy Miles, first. I got her ideas about it, and she said, well, why don't you talk to Neil? He's one of the doctors doing the research. So I accosted him somewhere over a stile in the middle of Derbyshire. And,
hello, like leg akimbo, trying to cock a leg over a fence. Hello, I'm Helen.
It was a bit like that.
Yeah.
And he was brilliant, because I wanted to ask him, could I get tested? I didn't think I could. Because
why didn't you think you could?
Well, because the NICE guidance didn't exist. I think I did know that some people were doing it, some places weren't. I thought I was the wrong side of 50. I didn't have a clear family history. There was this sort of prostate and bowel cancer in older men, but he said to me, go along to your GP and ask them to be referred, and you should be able to be seen. And of course, if you have a problem, then contact me. Well, fortunately, I didn't have a problem. I went to my GP, and she did refer me. And that ended up with me going to clinical genetics. So I have Eve, Neil, Emma, everybody to thank, really.
Oh, well, and we have you to thank for helping us and for doing all of the advocacy and stuff. But yes, fine, you can thank me mainly, and then Emma, and then Neil. It's incredible. So you went to your GP after that talk with Neil, and is it? I don't know. This is maybe a silly question, but how come you couldn't go back to your oncology team and say, hello?
It's possible I could have done, but Neil suggested I went to the GP, so I just did what he said. And they weren't routinely, the hospital I went to, they weren't routinely looking at that stage, so I suspect I would probably have got short shrift.
Fine. So you went to the GP, said, obviously this is what I've had recently, etc. Can I be referred? So you were referred to the clinical genetics team. And then what happened? Did you have to be sort of asked, are you sure you want this test? Because obviously it's got implications, isn't it? And so what sort of happened when you got through to the genetics team?
Well, I had a long chat with a genetics counsellor, because it's quite a big thing. It's one thing knowing you might have this altered gene that makes you more at risk of cancer, but it's another thing actually knowing that for sure. And it's a bit like letting the genie out of a bottle. So basically, the genetic counsellor was lovely, and she spoke to me about all the implications for me, what it would involve for me, also that my family could be tested. And actually, that was the main driver for me. Yeah, sure, I didn't want a second cancer, having survived one, but I wanted my children and my family to know if they had this gene as well, because there's all the first degree relatives of mine. So that's my mum. My dad had died by this stage, sadly. My sister and my two sons all had a 50% chance of having the altered gene that I had.
So first degree relatives are where there's sort of just one away from you, like a cross up or down sort of thing. And you say it's 50% chance that the first degree relative will also have it.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I went into testing, I think, being very well prepared for all the possible outcomes. That I did have Lynch, I didn't have Lynch, etc. And ultimately, I found out I did. So initially, they tested my tumor. So they keep the tumor samples and they do some
I
tests.
find that so weird that there's just this like room where they can say like, oh, Helen, there it is, and we'll just go and get it. It's weird, isn't it? Even like a couple of years after, it's crazy.
Yeah. So they looked for some proteins in that. I think Tracy was talking about that last week, and there was some missing proteins. So that suggested that the genes, these mismatch repair genes, weren't working properly. But that could either be because they're not working properly in the tumor, or it could be because you've inherited a gene alteration, i.e. Lynch syndrome. So I think the results of that took quite some time to come back, but so found that some of those proteins were missing. So that meant then I needed to have a blood test, which is the genetic or germline test. And that was specifically looking to see if I'd got an altered gene in all the cells in my body. I mean, they looked at it in the blood. And so several months later, I got that result back. And
did you get that kind of via a letter, or how were you told?
Well, I was asked how I'd like to find out. I was given a choice. So I could either be sent a letter, or I could be sent a letter inviting me to appointment and told then, but I wanted it in the letter. So that's how it came.
How did you feel when you opened that letter? Did you know what that letter was when it popped onto the mat, sort of thing?
Yeah. It's a bit weird.
Yeah.
I think the weird thing is because you've lived with this thing all your life, but that's the moment when somebody tells you that it's there. Does that make sense?
Been there since it's been there since you were born. But I can imagine that's strange.
In a way, I think I was relieved. Does that make sense? I've gone through all this, and I think because the proteins had been missing, there was a reasonable chance that it may be Lynch. And actually, I felt more frustrated because you can be somewhere in the middle ground where they don't quite know if it's Lynch or not. It's sort of Lynch-like syndrome. So actually to know meant that all these sort of things then would happen. So I could be sent for colonoscopy screening, I could go on to aspirin, and as though my family could be tested as well.
So in terms of your action plan after that, so we'll talk about family in a second, but you had the letter, Helen's got Lynch. So you said about colonoscopies, because obviously there's an increased risk of bowel cancer. So what does that look like? Is that how often is that? And can you talk about the aspirin bit as well, kind of in terms of your now screening?
Yeah. I'm going to start with the aspirin. That's fairly easy. So you just take aspirin every day.
Yeah, Helen, could you explain to me aspirin? Well, Karen, I take aspirin. I could have figured that out myself, couldn't I? I don't know why I asked that.
No, there's a lot of evidence, a lot of work being done that shows that it reduces the risk of bowel cancers in people with Lynch syndrome.
Okay.
And it's quite a low dose. It's not a benign drug, aspirin, so you have to get your GP to prescribe that. But no, so I'm on that until I'm about 70. I think they advise you stop around 70 because the risks start to go up then when you get a bit older. And colonoscopies, that's every 2 years.
And is that a camera up your bum?
That is a camera up your bum, which is
Mm.
actually the relatively good bit. The worst bit is
whatever you're into, Helen. No judgment. This is Helen. She's a fan of colonoscopies.
I was a fan of the sedation. I was away with the fairies, so actually they could do anything.
Oh, so you're sedated for it, are you?
Yeah. I mean, it's my genetic counsellor said to me, it's a really good idea to go for the sedation because you're going to have these regularly. I mean, for some people, they're starting them at 25 or 35 and having them every 2 years.
If someone finds out at a young age, they're obviously going to say yes to the screening, aren't they?
Yeah, and for some people, it can be quite a straightforward procedure. For others, it can be a bit uncomfortable. I think particularly if you've had a hysterectomy, because all the anatomy moves around a little bit. So
does the colonoscopy screening for people with Lynch, does that start however old you are? Like if I was 18 and found out, or does it start after a certain age when the risk of bowel/colorectal is higher? Do you know what I mean?
It depends on which gene alteration you've got.
Okay.
So for somebody like me with an MSH6 gene alteration, it starts at 35 nowadays.
Okay.
Whereas if it's an MLH1, it starts at 25 because they're different risks.
Yeah, different risks, fine.
Yeah.
So you have colonoscopy, and so you're sedated, and what are they looking for when they put the camera up your bottom? What are they doing? I don't know why I'm like, I'm coming for you. Here I come.
There's no other way of saying it.
No, I don't. We've really derailed this, haven't we? It's supposed to be like a really, like, thanks so much for sharing your journey, Helen. And instead it's
they are looking for any evidence of early signs of cancer, mostly polyps, which are like little polyps in the bowel, like I had a polyp in. Most of those are completely benign, but they're picking them up before they develop into a cancer. So sometimes in some people it will pick up an early cancer, but the whole point is to get rid of these things, so they remove them there and then. So I had my second one just before Christmas, about 2 days before Christmas, which was lovely.
Well, we know that would have been an early Christmas present for you, because you like.
Funny enough, it was really quiet.
Oh no! Oh dear.
And I had a little polyp removed then, which came back absolutely nothing to worry about. So that's really reassuring.
So do you feel kind of is it almost in a way like comforting having those every 2 years? Because obviously it's screened, but it's also it must be kind of, you must be relieved you found out, because some people don't want to get tested, do they? Some people don't want to know if they have Lynch, which is totally fine.
No, I think if you're at risk, so you have a family member, I think even if you don't want to be tested, I think you can still be screened.
Oh really?
I don't quote me on that, but that's that's my understanding. But no, I mean that's the whole point of this. I've had one cancer, I don't want a second one. If there's anything I can do, despite the fact that colonoscopy is not the greatest thing to have done, it's a small price to pay, really.
Of course. And just moving on to your family, so you said about first degree relatives, so that's parents, siblings, kids, i.e. one person removed, sort of one step away rather, they'll have a 50% chance. And also it can't skip a generation, can it? So if you were negative, your children wouldn't have needed to be tested because they couldn't get it from a grandparent. So it's either your parent has it, and that's kind of, if they don't have it, it stops there, sort of thing, doesn't it? Yeah. And
absolutely.
Then it's 50-50 whether you have it. So who needed to be tested for you? Do you have like you mentioned children?
Yeah. So 2 boys in their mid to late 20s at the time, and they were both negative, which was fantastic. So that's great in terms of my descendants. It stops with me, which is great. My sister was fine too. So she's a little bit older than me, so she would have had to have had she didn't have to, but she had the choice to have a hysterectomy and an ovaries removed. So she doesn't have to worry about that now. My dad had died by then, and my mum, and lo and behold, it was actually mum that I inherited my gene alteration from.
But it was your dad's family that had the prostate and bowel and all that.
Yeah. But it was from mum, and mum at that time was 79, no history of cancer.
So she hadn't ever had one of the diseases?
No.
Wow.
So really, really good example, because it is just an increased risk. It doesn't mean that you will get cancer.
No, it's not a guarantee at all, is it? I think, it is. Obviously, more people that we speak to than not will have the screening or preventative surgery or whatever can be done to decrease their risk. But this is, you're right, a prime example that it's an increased risk. It's not a cancer diagnosis.
Yeah.
So you were the only person in terms of sister and children that had it. So that was it. So it was you and mum, and then that's that.
Yeah. And then mum can then cascade testing onto her family.
Onto her family,
But apart from that, it's a very positive outcome, really.
Yeah. How did you feel when both of your sons were negative?
Oh, so relieved.
I bet.
Because even though there's absolutely nothing you can do about it, there's this whole guilt tied up with the possibility of them having a genetic condition that you've passed on to them. It's crazy, because there is no control over it. But
you would have blamed yourself, wouldn't you? Which of course, it's understandable.
They'd have in their late 20s, they'd have a lifetime of colonoscopies to look forward to, and aspirin. But they'd have done it, I'm sure. But
of course,
it's quite nice.
Did they, out of interest, did they kind of hesitate to get tested, or were they like, nope, sign me up, let's go?
I don't think there was any hesitation. I think their mother's quite influential.
Is that you, Helen?
I had spoken to all my family about it from really early on. I was thinking about getting tested, keeping them updated, not to make them do it, because you can't make them get tested,
No.
but just to talk through the process and share it with them, and then they could come to their own conclusions. But no, they were all quite keen from the off to get tested if I was positive. So,
and you were very open about everything from the get-go. You kind of just sharing what was going on, keeping people up to date, even with the cancer before you knew it was Lynch. You were kind of just open, sharing information, sharing your experience, not.
Yeah, there was nothing to hide really, and it's also quite nice to talk to people about it.
Of course,
just to share it.
Of course, and we'll start to wrap up because we're coming to the end of our half an hour. But so you found Eve through the trek, and I also, when we were in our little backstage area, I said to Helen really stupidly, "Oh, do you know Emma Crosby then?" Emma is Queen Lynch Syndrome researcher, and Helen was like, "Yeah, no, we speak all the time. Our paths are crossed." And I was like, "Oh, that is such a silly question," because once you're in the sphere of something, you kind of end up meeting all the same people, don't you, over and over, and see each other and kind of keep cross pathing. So sorry, I asked you if you knew Emma, but what are you kind of up to as an advocate now?
What am I up to as an advocate?
Yes.
Am I allowed to mention another gynae charity?
Of course you are. We're not one of those charities that's like competitive and weird. That's not cool. So please, like, say or plug whatever you want, my dear.
We are all friends here.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, all this, one of the positive things that have come out of it, I've got involved as a patient and public involvement in lots of things to do with genomics and womb cancer and Lynch. But I sometimes felt that was a bit of a lone voice, particularly with womb cancer and Lynch syndrome. We're in the minority, and both of them are often described as being poor cousins. Nobody's heard of womb cancer and nobody's heard of Lynch syndrome. So put those two things together. But anyway, the long and short of it is that I spoke to Peach's Womb Cancer Trust. Emma is one of the trustees, founding trustees of that one, about setting up a patient voices group to encourage women with womb cancer to have a role in research. Because obviously with research, there's so much research to be done with womb cancer and Lynch and all sorts of things. Just to give people women with womb cancer a voice. And it's been incredible, actually. We set this up in about October, and we have over 40 ladies signed up to this.
Wow, in sort of 6 months or so. That's brilliant.
Yeah, people who've experienced womb cancer, carers of people who've had womb cancer, all sorts of different experiences. And it's really, really good. And we've had lots of researchers approach us and have used them and have come back and been really pleased and very much value the input that the group played. So that's what I'm doing now. So there we go. Womb cancer and Lynch, and that's what I'm doing.
Womb cancer and Lynch. And what would you say? So say someone is kind of worried they might have Lynch due to family history, or like yourself, due to a cancer diagnosis, has found out they had Lynch. What kind of like couple of things might you say to someone that's kind of at the start of their Lynch? I hate using the word journey, but sometimes you have to.
Is this before they've been diagnosed or after they've been diagnosed?
Let's say before, and then let's say after. I want both from you.
Yeah, no. Before, I think just arm yourself with knowledge, find out about the implications. What if I do test positive for Lynch? What does that mean for me? Because I think to give proper consent or to choose to have this test, it is quite a big thing. So I would make sure you have all that information available, and ask questions if you're not understanding. Then ask questions. I think afterwards, know what you're eligible to have. So the different gene alterations have slightly different. We talked about the colonoscopies starting at a different age and that sort of thing. So know about your own gene alteration, know when you're supposed to have things, know that you're supposed to have aspirin, know who to go to. That's quite hard, actually. One good place to go for advice and get peer support is Lynch Syndrome UK. That's a patient-led organisation. They've got a great Facebook group, and there's lots and lots of experience and knowledge there. So I certainly recommend going there if you're lost, because you might get 2 or 3 different answers, but somebody will point you in the right direction.
But you will at least be able to get someone.
Yeah, because there's quite a few people now being diagnosed with Lynch and all having different levels of service and things. But I think together collectively, I think we're a lot stronger. We the Lynch community.
We. Helen, thank you. That is such a gorgeous little note, like we're stronger together. That's a lovely note to end on. So I'm going to pop you backstage, but thank you so honestly. I think this was such an interesting and I hate the word inspiring, but I'll say it anyway. I think you're just wonderful, and I'm not going to toot your trumpet too much or whatever the expression is. That sounds like a colonoscopy joke, which I'm not going. Oh no, I know it does. Where's this going? But no, seriously, I'll speak to you backstage in a sec. But thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Helen. Bye.
Bye.
Oh, wasn't Helen wonderful? I am so grateful to people that give up their time to be my guest on this, because the series wouldn't happen if I didn't have somebody else to share the screen with. So thank you again so much to Helen. And Peaches was the womb cancer charity that she mentioned, and LS UK, Lynch Syndrome UK, was the patient-led Lynch group, the Facebook page she recommended if you're watching this, have Lynch and want to talk to people and kind of go from there. Lynch Syndrome UK and the Peaches womb cancer charity. So thank you again to Helen. Thank you to everybody who's tuned in live to watch this episode on the personal experience of living with Lynch syndrome. Thank you if you're watching this on catch up. However you're watching it, thanks for taking the time. I hope you found it interesting. I don't know when we'll do series 7, but we will do it at some point. So watch out on our social media channels for the announcement of those dates and those topics. But until then, if you've ever got any type of gynae cancer question, you can contact Ask Eve via nurse@eveappeal.org.uk. That's nurse@eveappeal.org.uk. We're always there for you. So until next series, thanks so much for watching and stay safe. Bye.